St. John's on the Lake. Certainly glad to have you here. A lot of folks will come to church on Christmas Eve or Easter and think they've been here for a while, so they can stay away for a while. We're glad you're here. Be part of that. If you've got a smartphone, we love folks to tell people where your friends and family, where you're spending your Sunday morning, and you can highlight St. John's on the Lake and then put it in that silent mode so it doesn't interrupt our time of worship together. We're glad to have this sharing of this time, the Sunday after Easter. Well.
Will you stand as we share our call to worship this morning? When we seek justice for the other,
When we love kindness more than ever,
we live as God asks us to live. When we walk humbly through life,
when we offer mercy to those who hurt us,
we are the blessing God hopes we will be. When we are willing to look foolish by following Jesus,
when we choose weakness rather than power,
we reflect the one who is in our midst. Join us for our opening song, Wounded World That Cries for Healing. It's in The Faith We Sing. If you'd like to see the notes, the words will be on the screen.
Seated. Taking time during our service to share prayer joys and concerns that are part of our lives. We do have a response each time there is a If it's a hallelujah, I'm going to share the words, as one heart is lifted, and then your response will be on the screen, may we share its celebration. If there is a hurt that's being shared, some kind of prayer concern, I want to say the words, as one heart is burdened, and your response is, may we share the pain it knows. So invite those, if you have joys and concerns, those hurts and hallelujahs in your life, we'd like to invite you to lift those up and share them out loud for our community of faith.
I have a hallelujah. I'm very grateful for many years I've been trying to get back to school to do my doctorate degree in music. I finally arranged it to make it work. I'll be starting in the fall.
So hallelujah, Scott's going back to school to work on his doctorate in music. So that's a hallelujah. We're going to share. As one heart is lifted, may we share its celebration. Another joy or concern.
It is a joy. It's also a concern, but we'll use the joy response. This coming weekend is Pride, and I just want to lift up that we all pray that particularly Harold maintains his sanity. You may or may not know we have 8 congregations, 4 Christian, 4 Jewish congregations that are coming together to represent progressive faith at Pride, and Harold is in charge of all of that. So my prayer concern is for Harold, but it's also really a joy because it's going to be a great experience. So.
As one heart is lifted,
May we share a celebration.
yes.
We can keep Carla in our prayers. Carla's not here with us today because she recently had cataract surgery, so she's happy about that. She'll be seeing it for healing.
Prayers for healing for Carla who had cataract surgery. As one heart is burdened, may we share the pain it knows. Yes.
Sorry. That's your
Grandma. Okay, so grandmother's sick in the hospital. Okay, we want to lift up. As one heart is burdened, may we share the pain it knows. Yes.
Your brother passed away a couple weeks ago, so prayers for the family.
As one heart. Anyone else? Let's go to God in this time of prayer together. We will share in singing Make Us One. It's an insert in the bulletin. Gracious, loving God, make us one in your name that we can be the body gathered, this community of faith scattered among us and around us and away from us, that we all come and are one, God. This world that seems so many ways that we have has taught us to pray, saying, Our Father, who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. Thy kingdom come, thy will be done on earth as it is in heaven. Give us this day our daily bread, and forgive us our trespasses, as we forgive those who trespass against us. And lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from evil. For thine is the kingdom, and the power, and the glory forever. Amen. Our reading from the Holy Scriptures comes from Mark's Gospel, the 10th chapter, verses 17 through 22. I'm reading from the Common English Bible. You can follow along with your own Bible. If you have it on iPhone, you can use that as well. Here it is, the words of God as shared by Mark. As Jesus continued down the road, a man ran up, knelt before him and asked, "Good teacher, what must I do to obtain eternal life?" Jesus replied, "Why do you call me good? No one is good except the one God. You know the commandments. Don't commit murder. Don't commit adultery. Don't steal. Don't give false testimony. Don't cheat. Honor your father and mother." "Teacher," he responded, "I've kept all of these things since I was a boy." Jesus looked at him carefully and loved him. He said, "You are lacking one thing. Go, sell what you own and give the money to the poor. Then you will have treasure in heaven. And come, follow me." But the man was dismayed at this statement and went away saddened, because he had many possessions. The word of God for us as the people of God, we give thanks to God. Amen.
Amen. We're going to do something a little different today. We're going to play a game. See, last week was all seriousness and, Easter stuff, and today we're going to play a game. You may or may not be familiar with this game. How many of you know Jeff Foxworthy? The comedian? Anybody? Thank you, Ralphie. Somebody does. You may actually know one of his most famous bits more than you know him. It resonates a lot in my household because, in the household I grew up in, because my dad was born and raised in West Virginia. He's the one that has the "you might be a redneck if." Does that sound familiar? You might be a redneck if, all of those. And I say ouch, ouch every time because I recognize so many of those. We're going to do something like that, but a little bit different. We're going to do the "you might have privilege if." And in a very Oprah-esque way, I'm going to ask you all to reach under your seat, right underneath your lap. In the front of your hymnal section, you should find a little piece of white paper. Plane tickets, yeah. Scott's wanting plane tickets. There are no plane tickets. Right underneath you, like right between your legs, just reach down, and there's a little place where you can store a hymnal or papers or notebook or whatever. And I want you to look at that. And does anybody understand that we chose items that we think that many of us will have to say guilty? So it's okay. This is a safe place. So if any of you are intrigued by what your little slip of paper says, will you stand and read it, and let's see how many people it applies to? Anybody? Phil?
You might have privilege if your family ever took vacations out of your hometown.
So you might have privilege if your family ever took vacations outside of your hometown growing up. Ouch. Anybody else? Ralphie?
You might have privilege if you never had to go to the library to use the internet.
You might have privilege if you never had to go to the library to use the internet. Anybody? Anybody else?
You might have privilege if you don't worry about kissing your significant other in public.
You might have privilege if you don't worry about kissing your significant other in public. Of course, I wouldn't worry about it either, regardless of, who my significant other was, but but I'm not easily intimidated by that.
You might have privilege if you've ever inherited money or property.
You might have privilege if you've ever inherited money or property. As you can tell, remember I said the redneck thing? It kind of goes hand in hand. I've never inherited property or money, but anybody else? Intrigued? Lauren?
You might have privilege if English is your first language.
You might have privilege if English is your first language. Anybody else? You might be privileged if you've ever been to the dentist for a teeth cleaning. Caroline, you can read yours?
You might have privilege if you have never had to change your appearance, mannerisms, or behaviors to avoid being judged or ridiculed.
I can't repeat all of that. You might have privilege if you've never had to change your appearance, mannerisms, or behaviors to avoid being judged or ridiculed.
You might have privilege if your parents told you you could be anything you wanted to be when you grew up.
You might have privilege if your family owned the house you grew up in.
I grew up at Parsons.
Go ahead, Jay. You might have privilege if you've never been homeless. Anybody else want to share theirs? Yeah. You might have privilege if no one's ever tried to save you because of your religious beliefs. Believe it or not, that doesn't apply to me. I came under horrible scrutiny with lots of very threatening phone calls when Obama was being elected the first time because I happened to be the pastor of Trinity United Church of Christ, which shares the same name as President Obama's home church in Chicago. Anybody else? Yeah, go ahead. Sorry, did you say you were going to be? You might be privileged if you see people who look like you presented positively in movies and TV. Do these hit home? Are these things that you've ever really thought about? Some of them, my favorite one, and it probably obviously got in a chair that no one happens to be sitting in, is you might be privileged if you've ever gone to the doctor for a checkup. That one almost made me cry when I read that, because it brings home the concept that that's a gift. We may also see it as a right, but it's a gift because not everyone has the privilege to go to the doctor just for a checkup. It's really hard. Privilege is something that we need to talk about, something that we need to be aware of, and yet privilege is for many of us something we have no idea that we have. It's very insidious, very insidious. And every culture, every developed culture, I should say, has its own constructs of privilege. They may not all look the same, but they all have them. And it starts, and as Americans, I think most of us are Americans, maybe if not, thank you for being here and being with us. But it starts with Americans with the ladder. You know, we hear about climbing the ladder of success, the ladder, and what rung are you on, and you know, all of that. It starts with this concept, or higher than other people, or that our good feelings about ourselves starts with, where are we on the ladder? Are we higher up on the ladder, or are we too low on the ladder? And then it develops very quietly into something that's more akin to a skyscraper. And maybe well, it should be in Miami. That might sound familiar, but it really, I keep coming back to this image because our daughter Dana, who doesn't necessarily see herself as a person of huge privilege, but because she married an incredibly smart man, she would be okay with me saying that, she was able most recently, she just moved from New York City, and she lived in the financial district, one building off of Wall Street, and she lived on the 40th floor. It's kind of like that. If you live on the 40th floor of a skyscraper, you have a gorgeous view. And if you just live your whole life on that floor, you start to take that for granted. And you forget that there are not only people on the 10th floor and the 3rd floor and the 1st floor, there are people in the basement. And they don't have the same view that you have. And so this construct, this institution, this invisible institution, is sort of built around us that causes us to all of a sudden find that we don't live in the same places as other people. But for many people, both positively and negatively, they never really leave the plane that they're born onto. And it's hard to understand where someone else is if they don't live on that same level that you live on, positively or negatively. Now, I might say that if you do live in the basement or if you live on the 1st floor, you recognize that people have it much better on the 40th floor because you're the one that gets the people urinating on the sidewalks or the loud, horrible noises of the sirens and all of those things that come along with being at ground level in a city. You know that there are people that aren't subjected to that. But when you live on the 40th floor, all of that fades. All of that fades, and you just don't realize. So why are we talking about this, you might say? The reason that we're talking about this is because something has been happening over the last 15 years in our country that is causing what I term a collapse of the institutional privilege in our country. And if you think about it, if you may or may not be able to relate to living on the 40th floor. I never was able to until I went and stayed with her. But at the risk of being crude, if you can imagine yourself living in one of the Twin Towers on the 40th floor or the 90th floor, and you're living your life perfectly happy, and all of a sudden there's a bang and the building shakes, and then you hear that there's fire below you, and you feel everything that's happening. When that building collapses, you collapse too. That started on 9/11. The collapse of well, it actually started before then, but I think that we started to feel the ground shake with 9/11 15 years ago. We realized all of a sudden that we had this sense of national privilege, that we were used to being the safe place. For years, we heard about people in restaurants in Tel Aviv, and someone would come in with wearing a jacket bomb, what's the word? Suicide vest, and blowing up the whole cafeteria. We heard that that happened, but we never really thought that that would touch us. We're the United States. And that was the day that we started to feel the reverberations of our loss of privilege. Next, we had the Wall Street banking crisis. All of a sudden, we thought our retirements were safe. And then they're not. well, I thought I had a plan, and now I'm not sure I can retire. Or I had a house, and now I don't. How many people, millions of people who always saw themselves as homeowners? That's just part of who they were. And there's a sense of privilege about that. Let me turn that just a little bit and let me use the term security instead of privilege. There was a security in owning a home. And all of a sudden, in the matter of 6 months, millions of people no longer owned a home. We've had landmark Supreme Court rulings in various aspects of our lives, some of which you and I in this place have celebrated. But if we think about it, those same rulings rocked the foundations of other people who always thought they had the answer. Same-sex marriage. That was a day we all celebrated in this place because we felt that justice has finally arrived. But for people who grew up thinking, okay, I'm with the majority, all of a sudden they don't have the ability to define who gets married. That feels weird. That just feels uncomfortable. We've seen threats to women's reproductive rights. I can tell you that shakes me. It shakes me. We've seen campaign finance reform with the whole corporations are people. Think of the power that we used to have as individual voters. Look at the power that we had to give to campaigns and show our support. Folks, they don't need us anymore. They've got businesses who can give unlimited amounts of money. We've lost our privilege, even as human beings. You feel how all of a sudden the ground is getting rockier and rockier. Most recently, we saw the overturning of the Voting Rights Act. That's a little scary. We thought we had reached a point where we had protections for the right for everyone to vote. And all of a sudden, we're not so sure. We have this, as Glenn has labeled it, civic anger politics. I like that term, and I'm going to use that a lot, probably. There's this political polarity. You've heard the party of no. Well, what's happened is we've lost the voting bloc of the middle-class white voters. I'm not saying they always voted for the correct thing. Please don't hear what I'm not saying. I disagree a lot with the way that group voted. But all of a sudden, they don't have the same power that they used to have. And it turns the system into turmoil. You know, I love the fact that politicians today have to pay attention to the Latino vote. I think it's wonderful. But think about how weird that is for someone who always thought they sort of had control of what their country looked like. And all of a sudden, politicians are listening to somebody else. They've lost that security that their interests are going to be protected. College expenses. This is the way that our children, all of our children, have really profoundly experienced a sense of a loss of privilege. They were told, go to college. You have to go to college. And they've gone to college, and now what do they have? Trouble finding a job and horrendous debt. Where's the privilege that they thought they would have, the educational privilege? We have the whole global warming argument. We have the Catholic Church sex abuse scandal. We have this Islamophobia that's that's been brought about by our war on terrorism. All of that has started this really heated battle between science and religion, or religion and no religion. There's a loss of religious privilege. I'm sure that Glenn can tell you that 40 years ago, well, 38 and a half years ago, when he went into ministry, ministers were respected. They were important members of the community. And on Sunday afternoon, somebody was taking them to lunch. Doesn't happen anymore. As a matter of fact, when I travel, if somebody asks me what I do for a living, I hesitate. Because what do I get when I tell them I'm a minister? I get all of their vitriol about the church. There's a collapse of religious privilege in our society. We have the overwhelming weight of gun violence and police brutality and domestic abuse that's happening in our country today, which to me is it's a reaction to the loss of male privilege, of white privilege, and of what I call bully privilege. Bullies used to have a lot of privilege in our society. We were, as a group of people, afraid of bullies. We've worked really hard to overcome that. I'm not saying that bullies should have privilege. I'm just saying think about how their world is rocked by all of a sudden they don't have that privilege. We have had a whole movement, a political movement of union busting. If you remember all of the governor recall movement in Wisconsin with Governor Scott Walker, he was getting rid of all of the public sector unions. It used to be that teachers and firefighters and policemen and even state clerical workers had a certain sense of power and privilege, of security, that they had a voice in society. And we're watching all of that collapse. Can you just, in just those things that I've mentioned, can you feel the turmoil that we are in our country? What we're going to be talking about over the next 6 weeks, and today I just really want to introduce you to the concept, is that we are experiencing a collapse of what has long been our American institutions of privilege. And I believe very, very strongly that Christianity, that Jesus, has the answer for how do we get beyond this? How do we take the next step? What does it look like in a post-privilege world? And so, and the interesting thing is, he's talked a lot about that. We just don't talk about what he says in using those terms. So the first thing that I want us to be able to begin to wrap our brains around is, how do we look beyond that sense of loss? And I think that there are a few things that we need to do, both personally and relationally with each other. And the first thing that I want to make sure that we do is don't demonize those people who are lashing out and lashing back. I can tell you that the number of truly, authentically fascist people is very, very low. There are lots of people who are acting in very fascist, racist, sexist, homophobic, all of those isms that we have in our society that are acting out in those ways. But don't demonize them, because their problem is fear. It's fear. And fear is the source of their pain, and ignorance of the issue is what causes those blind reactions that are not careful responses. So remember how you felt when you were fearful, and how easy it is to lash out or to lash back or to get just angry. Because for many of them, they don't really understand why they're afraid. They don't really understand why they're angry. They just know something ain't right. I don't feel safe anymore in my life, either physically or emotionally or socially or psychologically or in any way. They don't feel safe. And we need to recognize the negatives that privilege causes. I am not in any way, shape, or form saying, don't worry about privilege, let somebody lord their privilege over you. That's not what I'm saying. But I am saying, let's try to give people the benefit of the doubt to recognize that they may not have a clue. They may not have a clue that they are privileged. I can tell you that I grew up in an area of Ohio where there were no minorities. I use that, I should have put air quotes in that word. You know, all the groups that typically have been considered minorities, there were none of them in the town that I grew up in. And so we never thought of ourselves as being protectionist or racist, ethnists, or anything like that, because we didn't know anybody who didn't look just like us. It wasn't for trying to seclude ourselves. We just didn't know anybody. Nobody else lived in that community. I had to learn how much privilege I was born into in graduate school, of all places, because I just hadn't been exposed to it. But those negatives that privilege causes, they're real, but we do need to understand that not everyone is making a conscious choice to act on their privilege. And maybe, just maybe, we can embrace this collapse as an opportunity to present a new voice, an opportunity to share the good news of what Jesus brings. So what does Jesus say about this kind of thing? He says a lot. And his most talked about, the most reported sermon is told and is portrayed in several different situations and in our Gospels. And honestly, we don't know if there was one sermon that he gave a lot. How many of you have ever seen a traveling evangelist in more than one place? Anybody? Glenn, thank you, Glenn. Fifth generation PK, preacher's kid there. They have the same speech. Or, okay, let me put it this way. How many of you have seen the same political campaign or candidate at more than one rally? They have the same speech. They give the same speech wherever they go. So we don't know whether this was a speech that he gave so often, and different Gospels have different accounts of those, or if it's one incredibly momentous sermon that, because the Gospels were written so much later, were just set in different places. We don't know. But the point is, these teachings are repeated over and over and over again in the Bible. This sermon that I'm referring to is most frequently called the Sermon on the Mount. It's often called the Sermon on the Plain because Matthew and Luke have the most full versions of this sermon that Jesus gave. And as a matter of fact, in Matthew, it's 3 whole chapters. One sermon, 3 chapters. You guys think I preach a long time. But it happens on the side of a mountain. Jesus is up on a mountain preaching, or he's down at the bottom, the people are up on the mountain, so he's preaching up to them so they can hear. Well, in Luke's gospel, it takes place on a flat area, a flat open area, so the people sit down and he taught there. So, and I'm going to read just a little bit of a few excerpts of it, but I'm going to read from the Message, which is a contemporary translation, because I think we can relate to these words. But you can immediately translate it into the mind, in your mind, to maybe the older versions that you've heard. You're blessed when you've lost it all. God's kingdom is there for the finding. You're blessed when you're ravenously hungry. Then you're ready for the messianic meal. You're blessed when the tears flow freely. Joy comes with the morning. Count yourself blessed every time someone cuts you down or throws you out. Every time someone smears or blackens your name to discredit me, what it means is that the truth is too close for comfort and that the person is uncomfortable. You can be glad when that happens. Skip like a lamb if you like, for even though they don't like it, I do. And all heaven applauds. And know that you are in good company. My preachers and witnesses have always been treated like this. But it's trouble ahead if you think you have it made. What you have is all you'll ever get. And it's trouble ahead if you're satisfied with yourself. Yourself will not satisfy you for long. And it's trouble ahead if you think life's all fun and games. There's suffering to be met, and you're going to meet it. His fundamental teachings are turning the world upside down. We always think the rich are the blessed, and he says, no, no, no. It's the poor who are blessed because they get it. They understand. Today's reading that Glenn read and shared with you with the story, we often refer to it as the rich young man. And he comes to Jesus and he says, what do I need to do to experience this kingdom that you keep talking about that's all around us? And Jesus asks him, well, what have you done? And he lists off all of the religious practices. Well, I've done this. I've followed the commandments. I've, done everything that the law tells me I have to do. But there's still this empty hole. And Jesus says, you only have one more thing to do. Set aside your privilege. Voluntarily give up what privileges you and follow me. Follow me into a world beyond privilege. On the other side, where power isn't used over another person, power is shared with another person. This passage isn't about money being bad. It's about money was what was privileging him. And he couldn't relate to what Jesus was really talking about, this kingdom, this family that Jesus was building, this different way of living. He couldn't get it. And Jesus said, take whatever it is that privileges you and set it aside and come with me, because it's going to be a great ride, and we're going to find God together. I hope and pray that these next 5 weeks will be a great ride that we're going to take together, and we're going to start to recognize the privilege that we have, and we're going to learn how do we set that aside, and what does it look like if we do, and what's the possibility if we can. Set aside your privilege and come, follow Jesus to a world beyond. Go and do likewise. Amen.
Jesus invited all to the feast of peace and new life. Jesus risked everything in compassion. Jesus promised to make himself known in the breaking of the bread.
We give thanks for the wonderful gift of reflective awareness that allows us to recognize and name the presence of a creative spirit beyond all imagining in our universe.
And we give thanks. Everything we have, everything we see, everything we do, everyone we love, and everyone who loves us reveals the sustaining presence and our total dependence on it.
We recognize that human life gives this presence a particular way of coming to expression, and that in us, the presence can sing and dance, speak and write, love and create.
Conscious that we live, move, and have our being in this presence. We give thanks for people throughout history who have affirmed this loving presence in all people. Join. For those who have invited people to give witness to this by lives characterized by gratitude, compassion, generosity, and forgiveness.
Especially, we give thanks for Jesus of Nazareth. He loved so greatly and taught so clearly and courageously. He was able to set people free from images and ideas and religious practices that bound them into fear and a false sense of separation from the Spirit of all life. Through him, we have learned how our loving is a sharing in the life of this Spirit.
In him, we see this presence, urging all of us to make its creativity on earth more visible. We also remember the night before he died. Jesus again shared a meal with his friends. Through grain and grape, bread and wine, and in fellowship together, Jesus spoke of his enduring love for each of them. So we take this bread, we take this juice, mindful of the presence at work in our lives, in the ordinary and in the everyday.
We break this bread in celebration of the great truth that on this tiny planet, hurtling through cold, empty space, death is made the servant of life, and out of death, life is forever resurrected.
This cup with its fruit of the vine is a celebration that things are not always as they seem, that out of faithfulness and steadfastness, out of suffering and sorrow may come unsought blessings.
God of love, God of compassion, may the celebration of the wonder and the mystery of your presence
Strengthen and enable us to be your body, the church in the world. Here in this place, all are welcome, invited to receive a piece of bread, dip it in the cup, receive this sacrament of the bread and the cup of God's love. All are welcome to come. 19 years ago, I think it was March 29th, this congregation voted to become a reconciling congregation. So we're celebrating 19 years of being open, affirming, and reconciling. Next year will be 20, so we'll have a grand birthday cake or anniversary cake for being 20 years. But a reminder, next Sunday we won't be in this place. We'll have a time of worship down on South Beach. We'd love to have you join us.
12th and Ocean.
So 10:30 at 12th and Ocean. Harold has all kinds of ways you can be involved. You could ride the float. We have a float folks are right on. We have a time of worship together. We're going to be decorating the float.
You want to greet people and come to the booth?
Right, there's a big expo. We have a booth there we talk about who we are as a congregation, so we'd love to have help with that. But we won't be here in worship on this next Sunday. We'll be back in 2 weeks for continuing our collapse of American privilege and our time of worship together through the end of May. Our worship on South Beach will be sort of that sense of what is it about the privilege we have and our sexual identity and genders and choices about part of that worship experience. We'll be worshiping, as Gay's indicated, with other multiple faith communities and be a part of that. So not here. If you come here, there won't be anybody here, but come down to South Beach.
And Glenn?
Yes.
Glenn, so we're going to meet at Pride on Sunday.
This is God speaking, everybody.
I'm from back here. We're meeting at Pride on Sunday, and I think our float is going to be on Ocean and 5th, and we're going to meet at 8 a.m. to start the decoration of it. We have a Miss Reconciling, who is going to be our friend Jennifer Hilton, and the theme is going to be Priscilla, Queen of the Desert. So she's going to have a long, flowing backdrop thing that we need to build. But we need help decorating the float. It's going to be at 8 a.m. on Sunday morning. And then the worship service is at 10 and starts at 10:30, and then the parade starts at 12 noon. But we love people to be there around, if you can be there on Saturdays to just help us out with the booth, and if you want to stay over there late and just help us with the booth, that'll be great. And this is a party for Pride after 6 p.m. So if you have any questions.
If you come early on Sunday to help us decorate the float, parking is not a problem. You can park anywhere you want. So just come early and help us out. We really can use the help.
We suggest that if you want to park, you can park here, then take an Uber over there. It'll be a lot easier. And this is free parking. On the beach, the parking on the street is $4 per hour, and parking in a garage is $1. But it'll be cheaper to Uber there than it would to actually park on the beach.
So if you have questions, be sure to ask Harold or me, or we'd love to have it be involvement. It's a way that we can reach out to the LGBT community and be a part of Pride and that aspect of it. Other announcements that we have. We had a great arts event last night here in this space, and there's some talks coming up, not this Monday, but next Monday. Any other words?
Yes, we are trying to make a very concerted effort. We have already sent out extensive publicity about this series, not just happening at 11, but also happening at our No Reservations, our Mosaic Contemporary service, which is at 6 o'clock.
Right here.
Please, if you're willing to come and be here just to be a welcoming presence if people come, we really want to try to make this service really be viable. So if you want to come at 6 o'clock, we really appreciate that as well.
We did send out a postcard this week to folks in our Miami Beach community. Anybody get a postcard of their home? Anybody? No? You might have been the targeted audience because you're already here. So, but we hope that we'll get some spread word about that. Our time of closing is our closing song. Gay, you want to say a word about that?
Our closing song is Sent Out in Jesus' Name. And then we will have a benediction with a benediction song after that's over. So if you'll stand as we sing 2184, Sent Out in Jesus' Name.
Hear these words of benediction of sending forth. We go forth into God's world to share the good news that we have a God that loves all.